Anastasia Blackthorne bought the Crimson Moon Theater for $7 at a city foreclosure auction in Willowbrook Heights, where real estate developers with millions in their portfolios sat in uncomfortable silence, watching her bid on what should have been prime downtown property. But nobody else raised their hand. The auctioneer's gavel hung suspended in the crisp autumn air as Anastasia looked around the packed courthouse steps, expecting anyone to challenge her bid. The theater sat on a full city block in the heart of Willowbrook's cultural district, surrounded by trendy art galleries, upscale bistros, and boutique shops that catered to the city's growing arts community. Even gutted and condemned, the land alone was worth at least $300,000. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Going once, the auctioneer called, his voice lacking the enthusiasm he'd shown for previous properties. Anastasia noticed something deeply unsettling. The crowd of approximately 60 people wasn't looking at the theater's photograph displayed on the easel beside the auctioneer. They were looking directly at her, not with envy, anger, or the typical frustration of losing bidders, but with something that made her stomach clench with dread. Pity, raw, genuine pity, as if she'd just volunteered for her own execution instead of making what should have been the smartest investment of her life. The mysterious warnings begin going twice, the auctioneer continued, his voice now barely above a whisper, and an elderly woman wearing an elaborate purple velvet coat stepped closer to Anastasia. The woman's hands were gnarled with age but steady, and her eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd spent decades in the theater world. "Child, you don't want that place," Evangelina Rosehart whispered urgently, her breath forming small clouds in the cool air. "Trust an old performer on this. Some stages should never see another show." But before Anastasia could ask what she meant, the gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo off the courthouse walls and reverberate through the surrounding buildings longer than physics should have allowed. "Sold to the young lady in the burgundy coat for $7. The crowd began dispersing immediately, not with the casual pace of people finishing their afternoon business, but with the hurried, almost frantic movement of people fleeing something dangerous. As Anastasia approached the clerk's table to complete her purchase, she caught fragments of hushed conversations drifting through the afternoon air. Someone should have stopped her. Nobody's been inside since the Carruthers incident. Remember what happened to the last person who tried to renovate? The performer's secret still down there. 8 years and they're still watching. The clerk, a nervous man in his 50s with trembling hands, handed her the deed while avoiding all eye contact. When Anastasia asked about the property's renovation history, the man simply shook his head vigorously and walked away without speaking another word, leaving his paperwork scattered across the table. That's when Anastasia noticed the most unnerving detail of all. Every single person who had attended the auction, developers, local business owners, city officials, and curious onlookers, was now positioned at various points around the courthouse square. But none of them were moving toward their expensive cars or calling their drivers. They were waiting, watching her with the patient intensity of predators observing prey, as if they expected something specific to happen, something that had clearly happened before. The property's dark history, the ride to the Crimson Moon Theater, should have taken exactly 12 minutes through Willowbrook Heights' well-planned streets. Instead, it felt like an hour-long journey through increasingly ominous territory. Every traffic light seemed to stay red longer than normal, and Anastasia couldn't shake the growing certainty that she'd made a catastrophic mistake. But $7 for an entire city block of prime real estate was still $7 for an entire city block, regardless of whatever superstitious nonsense had spooked the local community. The Crimson Moon had been constructed in 1926 during the height of the Jazz Age, when Willowbrook Heights was establishing itself as a cultural destination, rivaling nearby metropolitan areas. From the street, the building appeared similar to most abandoned theaters, boarded windows covered with layers of faded posters, a darkened marquee missing half its letters, and graffiti covering what had once been an elegant Art Deco facade, featuring intricate geometric patterns and stylized theatrical masks. But the architectural bones were undeniably magnificent. The limestone exterior remained structurally sound despite decades of neglect, and the iconic vertical Crimson Moon sign, though completely dark, was still intact. Elaborate gargoyles and theatrical figures carved into the building's facade gazed down at the street with expressions that seemed almost alive in the shifting afternoon shadows. Anastasia discovered that the stage door was unlocked, not just unlocked, but recently oiled and maintained, as if someone had been coming and going regularly despite the building's apparent abandonment for nearly a decade. Inside, dust motes danced in thick shafts of golden light streaming through carefully arranged gaps in the boarded windows. The air carried a complex mixture of scents, stale perfume, old velvet wood polish, and something else she couldn't identify, something that reminded her of flowers left too long in a closed room. Exploring the backstage labyrinth, her footsteps echoed with surprising clarity as she moved through the backstage area, which was far more extensive than she'd expected. A maze of narrow hallways connected dozens of dressing rooms, each door hanging open to reveal mirrors still mounted on walls and costume racks pushed into corners. Some rooms contained elaborate makeup tables with drawers full of forgotten cosmetics, while others held racks of period costumes that looked as if performers had just stepped out of them. A grand staircase with an ornate wrought iron banister led up to what had once been the balcony level and administrative offices. Another staircase, this one narrower and steeper, descended into the basement levels where the building's mechanical systems and storage areas were located. But it was the main staircase that drew her attention. Every step was carpeted in deep red velvet that showed no signs of the wear and fading she'd expect after years of abandonment. The main auditorium literally took Anastasia's breath away when she finally entered it. Despite nearly a decade of forced neglect, the space retained not just its structural integrity, but much of its original grandeur. 800 red velvet seats, though showing some fading and minor tears, still faced an enormous proscenium arch decorated with gold leaf that gleamed in the filtered sunlight. The stage itself was vast, at least 50 feet wide and 40 feet deep, with fly galleries extending high above where elaborate scenery had once been raised and lowered during performances. But what struck her most was how clean everything appeared. Yes, there was dust and some deterioration, but nothing like the decay and damage she'd expect from a building that had been completely abandoned. Someone had been maintaining this place, at least minimally, for years. The hidden discovery behind the stage, it was behind the main stage, in the deepest part of the backstage area, that Anastasia made her first truly disturbing discovery. A section of what should have been solid brick wall showed unmistakable signs of recent construction work. The mortar between certain bricks was noticeably newer, and lighter in color than the surrounding century-old stonework. These newer bricks formed a perfect rectangle, approximately 10 feet wide and 8 feet tall, large enough for a person to walk through, but completely sealed off from the rest of the building. Anastasia ran her fingers along the edges of this newer construction. The work was professional quality, not a hasty patch job. Someone had invested considerable time, money and skill to permanently seal off whatever lay behind that wall. The mortar was so precisely matched to the surrounding stonework that someone would have to look very closely to notice the difference. But there were other telling details. The floor in front of the sealed area showed scuff marks and wear patterns, suggesting heavy objects had been moved in and out of this space regularly before it was sealed. And when she pressed her ear against the newer bricks, she could hear something that made her heart race, a faint echo, as if there was a substantial empty space behind the wall. A shadow suddenly passed across one of the high windows near the ceiling. Anastasia looked up sharply to see a figure on the fire escape of the office building across the narrow alley, watching her through the grimy glass with obvious intent. Even at that distance and through the dirty window, she could tell this person was deliberately staying hidden, using the fire escape's iron framework and shadows for cover. When their eyes met for just a moment, the figure immediately leapt out of sight. Anastasia heard the distinctive sound of footsteps on metal stairs, someone leaving quickly, but not before she caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold. The watcher wore a distinctive wide-brimmed hat with what appeared to be vintage theatrical feathers, exactly the kind of dramatic headwear that serious theater people sometimes favored. More importantly, she was certain she'd seen that same hat on someone at the courthouse auction, someone who'd been watching her with that same expression of pity and dread. The theater's documented history. Anastasia spent the remainder of the afternoon systematically exploring every accessible inch of the Crimson Moon Theater, but the sealed wall remained the most compelling and disturbing mystery. In the basement storage areas, she discovered boxes of historical materials that painted a picture of the theater's golden age. Programs from famous productions, photographs of celebrated performers, reviews from local newspapers, and financial records showing that the Crimson Moon had been extremely profitable well into the 90s. But it was a manila folder tucked behind some old stage equipment that contained the most revealing documents. Inside were newspaper clippings, official reports, and correspondence that told a much darker story. Crimson Moon Theater closes indefinitely after renovation incident. Willowbrook Heights Gazette, October 15, 2050. Following reports of disturbing discoveries during renovation work and subsequent strange activities, the Crimson Moon Theater will cease all operations pending a thorough investigation. Owner Bartholomew Carruthers declined to comment on specific details, but confirmed that renovation work has uncovered items and documents that require careful examination by appropriate authorities. The theater owner missing, police seek information. Willowbrook Heights Gazette, November 3, 2050. Bartholomew Carruthers, owner of the recently closed Crimson Moon Theater, has been reported missing by family members. Carruthers was last seen at the theater on October 30th, where he had been conducting what family members described as research related to the building's history. Police ask anyone with information to contact Detective Morrison immediately. Search for missing theater owner called off. Willowbrook Heights Gazette, December 22, 2050. After extensive investigation, police have suspended the active search for missing theater owner Bartholomew Carruthers. Detective Morrison stated that while the case remains open, all leads have been exhausted. The Carruthers family has requested privacy during this difficult time. The articles were brief and frustratingly vague, clearly written by reporters who weren't being given complete information, but they confirmed what the auction crowd had been hinting at with their strange behavior. Something significant and disturbing had happened at the Crimson Moon Theater, something serious enough to shut down a profitable business permanently and cause a man to disappear without a trace. As evening approached and shadows began lengthening throughout the theater, Anastasia decided she needed to return home to gather proper tools and conduct more thorough research. She had to understand exactly what she'd gotten herself into by purchasing this place. The theater district's collective memory, Antonello's Cafe, was usually bustling during the dinner hour, but tonight the popular theater district restaurant felt subdued and tense. The moment Anastasia walked through the door, every conversation stopped abruptly, servers froze mid-step, and diners turned in their chairs to stare at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to genuine alarm. The hostess, a woman in her 40s, with the confident bearing of someone who'd worked in theater management, barely met Anastasia's gaze as she approached the desk. "You're the one who bought the Crimson Moon today," the hostess said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with the weight of inevitable tragedy. Word traveled with lightning speed through Willowbrook Heights' tight-knit theater community. Anastasia requested a quiet table and ordered coffee, hoping to gather information through casual conversation. "What can you tell me about the theater?" she asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than concerned. Every customer in the restaurant turned to look at her again. An elderly man at the bar dropped his wineglass, and the sound of shattering crystal echoed through the sudden silence like a gunshot. A couple in the corner booth began whispering urgently to each other while shaking their heads in what appeared to be dismay. "That'll be $4, the hostess whispered, pushing the coffee across the surface without waiting for Anastasia to taste it or request cream and sugar. As Anastasia reached for her wallet, the restaurant's back entrance chimed softly. A tall woman with sharp, intelligent features and striking silver hair stepped inside with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention. This was clearly the same person who'd been watching Anastasia from the fire escape earlier. Up close, her vintage theatrical hat was even more elaborate, adorned with peacock feathers and a small silver mask charm. Her long coat bore traces of dust and showed signs of someone who'd been moving quickly through the city's back alleys and rooftops. "Isabella Nightingale," the woman introduced herself, extending a hand that Anastasia noticed was stained with what appeared to be old stage makeup and ink. "I heard you made an extremely interesting purchase today. News certainly travels fast in this neighborhood. Tragic news travels faster than any other kind." Isabella's smile was polished and professional, but her eyes held depths of concern that seemed genuine. "I'm here to make you what I hope you'll consider a very generous offer. $15,000 for that theater. Cash, tonight, no questions asked." The hostess dropped an entire tray of dishes. The crash reverberated through the restaurant like an explosion, and the sudden silence that followed felt thick with tension and unspoken dread. "That's quite a remarkable profit for a $7 investment," Anastasia said carefully, studying Isabella's face for clues. Why would you pay over 2,000 times what something cost when nobody else was willing to bid even $8? Let's just say I have very deep professional and personal attachments to that particular place. Isabella's tone carried undertones of loss and regret, professional enough to watch it from fire escapes and rooftops. Isabella's hand moved slightly toward her purse, a gesture that seemed more protective than threatening. I've been keeping careful watch over that property for nearly 8 years now, making absolutely certain that nobody disturbs what should remain permanently undisturbed. But now that someone legally owns the building, she pulled out a thick envelope that appeared heavy with bills. $15,000. This is my final offer, and I strongly advise you to accept it. Anastasia looked around the restaurant carefully. Every face, servers, customers, even people visible through the windows, reflected the same urgent message: take the money immediately and leave town. Whatever was behind that sealed wall in the Crimson Moon Theater, the entire theater community not only knew about it, but agreed unanimously that it should stay hidden forever. But something in Isabella's obvious desperation and the extreme nature of her offer made Anastasia deeply suspicious. People didn't offer such enormous sums for worthless property unless they needed it very, very badly. And they certainly didn't spend 8 years watching an empty building unless something extremely valuable or dangerous was hidden inside. I appreciate your generous offer, Anastasia said, slowly backing toward the restaurant's front door while keeping her eyes on Isabella. But I think I'll hold on to my investment for now. Isabella's carefully composed expression cracked, revealing genuine fear underneath. That would be extremely unwise, more unwise than you can possibly imagine. Are you threatening me? I'm desperately trying to save your life, your career, and possibly your sanity. Isabella's voice carried a note of pleading that seemed entirely authentic. The words hung in the air like smoke from dying stage lights. Every person in the restaurant had gone perfectly still, as if collectively holding their breath and waiting for something terrible to happen. But before Isabella could explain exactly what she meant, the sound of multiple sets of coordinated footsteps approaching the restaurant made everyone in the building freeze in terror. Through the large front windows, Anastasia could see 3 figures walking purposefully toward the entrance. They moved with the synchronized precision of people who'd performed together for years, dramatic, coordinated, and carrying themselves with the unmistakable authority that came from decades of commanding stages and audiences. One of them, a distinguished woman with elaborate theatrical makeup, even for streetwear, looked directly at Anastasia through the glass and nodded meaningfully to Isabella. Too late, Isabella whispered, her face going pale. They know you've seen the wall. They know you've been inside. What did Anastasia really discover behind that sealed wall at the Crimson Moon Theater? And who are these mysterious theater professionals so desperate to keep it hidden that they've been watching the building for 8 years? The shocking truth about what performers hid behind the stage will change everything you think you know about the entertainment industry. The moment of truth. The restaurant fell into an oppressive silence as Harrison Blackwell waited for Anastasia's response to his ultimatum. Sign over the theater deed and disappear quietly, or join Bartholomew Carruthers and the others who'd vanished trying to expose the truth. Victoria Ravencrest's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her vintage purse, while Marcus Thornfield's weathered face showed the resigned expression of someone who'd watched this scenario play out before. But as Anastasia sat there, surrounded by the weight of decades-old secrets and the very real threat of disappearing forever, something unexpected happened. Instead of fear, she felt a surge of righteous anger that surprised her with its intensity. "Ols, Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice carrying a steadiness that made everyone at the table look up in surprise. "I have a counter-proposal." Harrison's polite smile flickered. "I'm listening. I don't sign anything until I see exactly what's behind that wall. And we all go together, right now, to witness whatever Bartholomew Carruthers died protecting." The temperature in the restaurant seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harrison's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, revealing something much more dangerous underneath. "That would be extremely inadvisable, Miss Blackthorne." "Then here's what happens," Anastasia continued, pulling out her phone with deliberate slowness. "Before coming here tonight, I sent detailed emails to 3 investigative journalists. Sarah Martinez at the Washington Post, David Chen at the Chicago Tribune, and Rebecca Torres at ProPublica. All 3 emails contain everything I've discovered today, including photographs of the sealed wall, audio recordings of our conversations, and instructions to publish everything if I don't check in by midnight." It was a complete bluff, but Harrison's immediate reaction, the way his eyes widened and his hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, told her it was devastatingly effective. "You're making a fatal mistake," Harrison warned, his polite facade completely gone now. "The only fatal mistake would be letting 60 years of crime stay buried while more innocent people disappear." Anastasia stood from the table, her newfound authority surprising even herself. "So here's what we're going to do. We're all going to the Crimson Moon Theater right now. You're going to watch me open that wall, and then we're going to see exactly why so many people have died to keep those secrets hidden." Isabella and Victoria exchanged glances of shocked admiration, while Marcus actually smiled for the first time since entering the restaurant. "Lead the way, Mr. Blackwell," Anastasia added, "or I start making phone calls to those journalists right now, and this story breaks tomorrow morning with or without the evidence behind that wall." The journey to truth, the convoy of cars that made its way through Willowbrook Heights' quiet streets, looked like a funeral procession, which Anastasia realized grimly it might very well become. Harrison rode in a black sedan with 2 associates who'd been waiting outside the restaurant, while Anastasia traveled with Isabella, Victoria, and Marcus in Isabella's vintage Mercedes. "I have to ask," Victoria said as they drove through the theater district, "do you actually have journalists waiting to publish this story?" "Not yet," Anastasia admitted, "but I will by the time we're done tonight. Because whatever's behind that wall, the world deserves to know about it." Marcus leaned forward from the back seat. "You realize there's a very good chance none of us leaves that theater alive tonight. Then we'd better make sure the truth gets out before that happens." The Crimson Moon Theater looked even more ominous in the darkness, its boarded windows and darkened marquee creating deep shadows that seemed to move independently of the street lights. Harrison's security team had already positioned themselves around the building's perimeter, but Anastasia noticed something that gave her hope. Several cars parked nearby that didn't belong to Harrison's people. "Friends of yours?" she asked Isabella. "Word travels fast in the theater community," Isabella replied. "Especially when someone finally decides to stand up to the families that have been terrorizing us for decades. Breaking down the barriers Inside the theater, Marcus Thornfield hefted a sledgehammer with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent decades in construction and stage work. The sealed brick wall that had haunted Anastasia since her first visit to the building now seemed almost anticlimactic, just a few dozen bricks standing between the present and 60 years of buried truth. "Last chance to reconsider," Harrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew the moment for negotiation had passed. "Start swinging," Anastasia replied. The first impact of the sledgehammer against the wall echoed through the theater like a gunshot. With each subsequent blow, mortar cracked and bricks began to loosen. Harrison watched with the expression of someone witnessing the destruction of everything he'd spent his life protecting. When the wall finally gave way, what spilled out was more extensive and damning than anyone had imagined. The hidden room extended back 20 feet and was filled with filing cabinets, bankers' boxes, and sophisticated recording equipment that looked like it had been meticulously maintained despite the building's apparent abandonment. "Dear God," Victoria whispered, stepping into the revealed space. "There's enough evidence here to bring down half the state government." Anastasia moved deeper into the room, her flashlight revealing the scope of what Bartholomew Carruthers had died trying to expose. Financial ledgers dating back to the 1920s detailed systematic corruption involving land fraud, election manipulation, and judicial bribery. Photographs showed secret meetings between judges, politicians, and known crime figures. Bank records documented millions of dollars in bribes and kickbacks flowing through a network of shell companies. But it was the modern addition to this historical archive that made Harrison Blackwell visibly pale. A sophisticated computer system with external hard drives labeled by year, suggesting Bartholomew had been systematically digitizing the entire collection before his disappearance. He was preparing to expose everything, Isabella realized, examining folders of organized documents. He'd spent months creating a comprehensive database of corruption spanning 3 generations. The digital smoking gun, the computer system when activated, revealed that Bartholomew had been far more thorough and strategic than anyone realized. He hadn't just been collecting historical evidence, he'd been secretly recording contemporary conversations with current officials who were still participating in the conspiracy. Audio files from just weeks before his disappearance captured Harrison Blackwell, Mayor Patricia Goldstein, and Police Chief Robert Sterling discussing upcoming federal audits of land deals and detailed strategies for hiding evidence. Specific plans to eliminate the theater problem permanently. Lists of journalists and federal investigators who were getting too close to sensitive information. Elaborate schemes for making troublesome people disappear quietly and permanently. "Listen to this," Marcus said, playing a recording dated just 3 days before Bartholomew's disappearance. Harrison's voice came through with crystal clarity. "The theater situation requires permanent resolution. Carruthers has become an existential threat to everything our families have built. Whatever it takes to solve this problem, whatever it takes, I want it done before the end of the week." Mayor Goldstein's voice responded, "Are we talking about the same kind of solution we used for that historian in 2003? "Exactly the same kind," Harrison confirmed. "Make it look accidental, but make it permanent." The recording continued for another 20 minutes, detailing exactly how they planned to eliminate Bartholomew and destroy any evidence he might have gathered. It was a confession to premeditated murder, captured in their own voices. The evidence unveiled. As they continued exploring the digital archive, the scope of the corruption became staggering. The Blackwell family alone had been involved in systematically rigging municipal elections since 1947 through ballot stuffing and voter intimidation, selling federal land grants to private developers, using forged government documents, operating illegal gambling and prostitution rings with guaranteed police protection, eliminating witnesses and investigators through bribery, intimidation, and murder, covering up dozens of suspicious deaths dating back to the 1950s. Your family built their entire fortune on stolen federal land, Anastasia said to Harrison, reading from a 1960s ledger that documented the scheme in meticulous detail. This shows your grandfather selling the same federal land parcels to 5 different buyers, pocketing the money, and using forged signatures to make it all appear legal. And when people figured out what was happening, Marcus added, examining police reports that had been systematically altered, they mysteriously disappeared or died in accidents that were never properly investigated. Harrison had gone completely silent, his confident demeanor replaced by the desperate calculation of a cornered animal who realized his entire world was collapsing. The final confrontation, "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Harrison finally said, his voice carrying a note of genuine desperation. "These files don't just implicate local officials, they document corruption involving federal judges, state senators, FBI agents who've been on our payroll for decades. You expose this, and you'll destroy half the government structure of 3 states. Good, Anastasia replied, connecting a portable drive to Bartholomew's computer system and beginning to copy everything. Maybe it's time for some creative destruction. I'm prepared to offer you $10 million to walk away right now, Harrison said, pulling out his phone. More money than you could spend in 3 lifetimes. Enough to disappear anywhere in the world and live like royalty. Is that the same offer you made to Bartholomew before you had him murdered? Bartholomew was a naive idealist who thought the world wanted to hear uncomfortable truths. I'm giving you the chance to be smarter than he was. As if summoned by some pre-arranged signal, the sound of multiple vehicles surrounding the theater made Harrison smile with renewed confidence. Through the grimy windows, they could see armed figures taking positions around the building. My associates have arrived, Harrison announced. This ends now one way or another. But Anastasia had been expecting this moment and preparing for it. While Harrison had been talking, she'd been uploading everything to multiple cloud storage accounts and sending complete copies to news outlets across the country. Her phone buzzed constantly with delivery confirmations. I'm afraid you're too late, Mr. Blackwell, she announced, holding up her phone to show the stream of confirmation messages. Everything, every document, every recording, every photograph, has already been uploaded to secure servers and sent to the FBI regional office, the state attorney general, the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, ProPublica, and WikiLeaks. Complete copies with full